Hey guys, it's Dr. McDonald. We're going to start on our first chapter in Microlecture. Okay, we're going to do an introduction, talk about the state of microbiology back in the day, talk about the systemic approach that we like to take nowadays, and then finally end up with a short survey of the types of microorganisms. Microbiology is we're studying things that are too small to be seen unaided. Now, organisms imply life. Viruses are not alive, but they're also included in this. This has not been around all that long, just a little over 100 years. Nothing like astronomy or chemistry. It's been around for centuries and centuries. By the most liberal estimate, we've only probably studied and cataloged about less than 1% of all the microbial organisms in any given environment. So we still don't know a lot. That's the easiest way to say that. Microbiologist, of course, is the guy who studies microbes. Several disciplines in microbiology: bacteriology, which is the study of bacteria; mycology, which is fungi. What else was I going to say? Molds, things. Food microbiology, which is really important since we all eat a lot of processed food. Environmental microbiology, they do use certain bacteria that can break down oil from oil spills. Forensic microbiology, for going back and trying to connect the dots. Virology, which is the study of the viruses. Parasitology, which is the study of the parasites. A lot of those are protozoans, although the parasitic worms fall into that category as well. Why do you have to study this? Well, the short answer is because you have to have it to be a nurse, right? Now, in all seriousness, though, this is a very significant thing. Bacteria and the other microbes, not only are they a source of great morbidity, disease, pathology, but there are some bacteria that we cannot live without. True, very true. We'll talk more about that, of course, as we get on into the course. And then you have the algae, the photosynthetic, the ones that make their food from sunlight. And then the bacteria, the cyanobacteria, the blue bacteria, produce most of the oxygen in our atmosphere. That's important. Microorganisms also help us to get rid of dead stuff and waste products. The mechanism by which a septic tank works is you put bacteria in there that breaks down the waste products that go from your toilet. So they have their job. I don't want their job, but somebody's got to do it. Saprophytes, these are organisms, a lot of these are the fungi. They live on things that are dead or decaying, and that's not just animals, that can be tree trunks, plant matter. And we already talked about this, but let's give it a name. Bioremediation is the use of these bacteria to clean up toxic waste and other industrial things. As a matter of fact, there was an article about bacteria from Japan that have been kind of genetically bred or manipulated to break down plastics, which is something pretty exciting since we got a lot of plastic pollution. Continuing on, the microbes are really important in cycles. Carbon cycle, nitrogen, oxygen we've already talked about, sulfur and phosphorus. These guys are food for the tiny animals, and they're kind of like at the bottom of the food chain and also at the top, since they actually break down the dead animals. There are bacteria that live in our GI tract inside our bowels, and these guys help us by making some beneficial substances such as vitamins. Bacteria are so simple that they've been used as cell models to study how cells work. And so by doing that, they learned a lot about cells in general. It's easier, of course, to do something, to look at something that's fairly simple rather than the more complex cells that we're made out of. Learning objectives describe how our ancestors improved food with microbes. Describe the sickness and disease were explained in ancient times before the microscope. And then historical events. Fermented foods and beverages, and that, yes, that is ancient Egypt. Tabasco sauce, sourdough bread, Worcestershire sauce, kefir, lassi, tempeh, I have no idea what those are. Kombucha tea, kimchi I've heard of. Miso soup is really good. Fish sauce, not so crazy about it. Creme fraiche and sour cream. Good old sauerkraut, soy sauce, yogurt. All of these things are fermented with the aid of microbes. Okay, Hippocrates, the actual father of medicine, believed that all diseases had natural causes and weren't caused by the gods, which he's the one that we physicians take the Hippocratic Oath is named after. This historian, Thucydides, had been able to see that after a plague in Athens, that those who survived were thereafter immune if it came back around. And then Varro was a Roman physician, and he believed that diseases were caused by tiny creatures which could not be seen by the naked eye. You know, a lot of times people tend to think that these guys were stupid because they didn't have technology, but these guys were pretty astute. They were very sharp. They weren't stupid. They were every bit as smart as we are, if not more so, because they didn't have technology to use as a crutch like we do. Ancient infrastructure, plague doctor. I do not know why they wore that bird's mask. I have no idea, unless there were some rags or something in there to keep them from breathing in. Don't even ask me what that is. I have no idea, guys. Cloaca Maxima, the greatest sewer, that was actually built in Rome in ancient times, and by doing that, they were able to carry their septic waste away, and that prevented lots and lots and lots of disease. So again, you know, those ancient folks were pretty smart. These are ancient bathrooms in Rome. And yes, this was mixed gender. You sat there next to your friend or your girlfriend and emptied your bowels. And it doesn't say in here, but just as a bonus, they would actually had water running through this channel, running water. They had a sponge on the end of a stick, and that's what they used in lieu of toilet paper. Unfortunately, everybody used the same sponge, so I'm not sure that in that aspect they may have been somewhat backwards. Okay, continuing on, Anton von Leeuwenhoek, he's the guy who he made those lenses and made this little device here. And by doing this, he was able to see some of the larger of the microorganisms. He wasn't a physician or a scientist per se. I think it was more like a hobby. Louis Pasteur, as in pasteurization, which we do to our milk. This guy, in a lot of ways, is the father of microbiology. And there were some Germans involved in there too, but Louis Pasteur was head and shoulders. He investigated a lot on fermentation because, as you know, France has a large wine industry. He, of course, invented pasteurization. I don't know if he named that after himself or if somebody else named him. I guess if I invented something like that, I would name it after me too, right? Maybe make it harder for somebody else to steal credit for it or impinge your patent. Anyway, he discovered that there were certain microbes that exist without oxygen. As a matter of fact, there are certain microbes for which oxygen is toxic. It will kill them. Uh, he developed several of the vaccines, including one for rabies and for anthrax. Oh yeah, they call him the father. I've heard other people called that, but I think Pasteur is right up there. Koch, he would probably be the other one. He would be a co-father. I don't know what that meant for the mother, and I don't want to speculate. But anyway, German physician developed the germ theory of disease. Now he's basically taking off where Varro left off. Because to be honest with you, nobody really. I mean, the guy who made the wheel probably was original, but all the rest of us, we stand on the shoulders of the generations that were in the past. He identified specific microbes that cause anthrax and cholera and tuberculosis. He also developed a method of staining bacteria. Bacteria are clear. You put a clear something on a bright white background, guess what you see? Nothing. You have to color it, you have to dye it, and that's what a stain is. Also developed methods so that we could actually grow bacteria. That sounds kind of foolish, but I can tell you that when I have people in the hospital with infections, I'm going to get a wound culture if one has it, or blood culture, or urine culture. I want them to grow and identify the bacteria. Why? Because you use different drugs for different bacteria. Not all bacteria are sensitive to all the same antibiotics. Anyway, keep on going. Science of taxonomy, classification and naming. You probably know we have two names. Well, we got more than that, but generally we use this. That's the genus, and this is the species. For us, it's Homo sapiens, which means something like wise guy. I'm not kidding you. Linnaeus is the one who first came up with this. He divided everything into animals and plants, which pretty reasonable to me. Haeckel came and he decided animals, plants, Monera, and protist, microbes. And then Mr. Whitaker, all the way in 1969, and they knew about fungi, but at some point they decided that it belonged in its own kingdom. So as far as animal kingdoms, the highest level of class, no, there's a higher level, and kingdom is what we'll start with. Animal, plants, protozoa, Monera, which we would call bacteria, and fungi. So the binomial name, which we've already talked about, so for us it's Homo. You capitalize the first letter, and sapiens, and sapien is not capitalized the S. In case you're wondering, it is really difficult to try to draw with a mouse. I guess I'm just not used to it. Anyway, we've already talked genus and species. For us, E. coli is one that we will, maybe you've even heard of that. The E. Escherichia is capitalized and coli is not. And we abbreviate like that. Full names. If you wanted to put Escherichia coli or like this, you would actually put that in italics, you know, the little slanted writing. But you don't have to do that when you abbreviate. Or you could do like I did and just underline it. It doesn't matter. Size in the microbial world. Oh, wow. There's a round worm. It's big enough to see with your eye. There are cells that are big enough to see with your eye. they've got the yeast there. There's actually a bacterial cell. It's kind of an outlier, but there's a bacterial cell that's big enough to be seen with the naked eye. Humongous. Um, we won't go into angstroms or microns. A micron is a micrometer. So everything, of course, is based on the meter, and that is 1/100th of a meter, which is still a pretty good. What is that? I'm not going to convert it to inches. It'll take me forever anyway. A 1 millimeter, well, that one's still fairly large. You can see that with your eye. For example, I know my thumb nail is exactly 15 millimeters across. So it's not, but then you go into the smaller ones, and there's the micrometer, and down there's the nanometer, which is a billionth of a meter. Some of the viruses are down there. And if you notice, that range right there is the range for our microscope. We cannot look at viruses under a light microscope. We won't do it, and even if we had the face-to-face class, because they're too small. And couldn't we get a better microscope? You can't make a light microscope to look at something that small. That has to be done with an electron microscope. And you're not using light to look at it. You're actually using radiation of sorts. Anyway, prokaryotes, the microbes. These prokaryote means before a nucleus. You may have heard someplace in high school or whatever about a cell that has a nucleus. Prokaryotes don't. So where does their DNA hang out? They have a nucleoid region, but there's no like wall around it to separate it from the cell. Bacteria are prokaryotes, and there's also another single-celled organism called archaea. These guys are, we'll talk more about them specifically, but they're somewhere in between bacteria and and like human cells, which are called eukaryotes. Single-celled, no membrane-bound nucleus, does not contain any other organelles, and their cell, single cell, is surrounded by a wall. We don't have walls in our cells. Viroids, remember from AMP1. And everybody in here should have had AMP1. Domain, bacteria, most common type of human infection, Staph aureus. Staph aureus killed thousands of people thousands of years ago, and it still kills thousands of people today. We are still dealing with the same bacteria that Varro and Hippocrates did back in their day. We understand them a little better. Some of our medicines will do it, but not all of them. We lose patients to bacterial infections, and it hurts, but we do. Lots of diversity in here. These guys are going to come in specific shapes. Some of these guys are going to be rod-shaped. Some of them are going to be spherical. Some of them are going to look kind of, I don't know if I'm going to be able to draw this, guys, kind of like a corkscrew. Yeah, I guess you guys see why I am not making a living as an artist, right? But in any case, that gives you an idea. Those three shapes, this is going to be called a rod, or we can call it, well, let's just stick with rod for right now. And then the spherical, we'll talk about it as cossi, but we'll just stick with what we got for a little bit. We already talked about that the reason that these guys have hard, rigid cell walls, and that's what actually forms these shapes. These guys are going to multiply. How do they reproduce? Well, it's kind of sort of like what we do. with mitosis, they double. Of course, they don't do mitosis per se. And you got 2 new cells. And that's called binary fission. Would I know that if I were you? I think I should. 1 cell becomes 2. And of course, these guys are genetically identical, unlike what we do with our germ cells, such as sperm and ova. Some of these bacteria have got little tails on them called flagella that they use to move. They actually rotate like a boat propeller, like this in a circle, and that propels the bacteria. Archaea, these guys, a lot of the same things as bacteria, some of the same shapes. They do make binary fission. Some of them have flagella, but their cell walls are different from the bacteria and also different from some of the other organisms that have cell walls. These guys are extreme guys. These are the guys that live in the boiling hot springs at Yellowstone, that live in the Great Salt Lake or in the Dead Sea. So salty, nothing else can live there. These are the guys that live at the bottom of the ocean, right there with all those thermal vents. So these guys, they've got their niche. They're living places nobody else could. Eukarya, the guys with a nucleus, true nucleus, we're eukaryotes. We're not single-celled eukaryotes, obviously, but we are eukaryotes. So we've got a cell, we've got a nucleus, and we've got little specific things. We call them organelles. Think of them like little organs. And this should be a review for you guys from A&P, but I'll go ahead and review it. And these guys have special jobs. Think about the way your heart and your lungs are different because they have special jobs. The organelles inside these are also. And of course, we're going to talk about some guys that are eukaryotes that aren't human, like the fungi. They're eukaryotic, but they're obviously not human, single cell. More complex than the prokaryotes. Mitochondria is one little bean shaped. These guys can either be single or multicellular like us. Algae, a lot of single and multicellular. These guys, but that more like a colony though than a true multicellular organism. Algae do chlorophyll. That means that they're photosynthetic. They use it to produce their food. These guys, you see them around waters. If you've ever seen a greenish colored pond, these guys have rigid cell walls, but they're not made of the same material that the bacteria are. Fungi, single-celled and multicellular. When they're in single-celled form, they're called a yeast. When they form a colony, multicellular, we call them molds. These guys will get their energy from organic materials, and a lot of them are saprophytes, what we were talking about. And you're going to find these guys wherever you got organic materials of some sort. Protozoa, these are eukaryotic, single-celled organisms. These guys you can find on land or in water. Complex, and like all prokaryotes are tiny. That would be the relative dimensions of a bacterial cell and a eukaryotic cell. These guys do not have a rigid wall, and they get their energy from organic matter. A lot of these guys have the ability to move. Now this guy, you can see these little cilia on there. Looks like a paramecium to me, and they don't say something. I guess I could be right or I could be wrong. Helminths, these are the parasitic worms. That's the beef tapeworm, Tinea saginata, that can infect cows and people. These guys have microscopic eggs, and the adult worms, though, can go anywhere from 16 to 30 feet long, and they live inside your bowels, inside the GI tract. 30-foot long worm in your intestine could be. That's why we have to make sure we cook all the meat that we eat, okay? Here's a different one, the adult guinea worm, Draconcolus medianensis. And these guys, they're actually taking a matchstick and wrapping it around it and trying to pull it out one little bit at a time. These are not something you get through food. That would be something that would penetrate your skin, or you can get it through contaminated water. Infectious agents, non-living elements called agents because they're non-organisms. And these guys are just a few molecules. What are you talking about? Well, we're talking about viruses. A virus is nothing more. You got a protein container, and they can be shaped all kinds of different ways. And inside that, you've got either a piece of RNA or a piece of DNA or 2 pieces of each. It comes varied. These guys break out of there or come out of there once they get inside your cell, and then they hijack your cell, take it over, and make your cells protein and nucleic acid cloning machinery, make copies of them. That's what a virus is, guys. Viruses, protein coats surrounded by nucleic acid. We already talked about. These guys are obligate intracellular parasites. They don't have anything. There is no organelles. They don't have anything to reproduce. They have to steal it from somebody, from their host. When they're outside of their host cell, maybe traveling to the next cell, they actually can't do anything. If you can keep them out of your cells, then they will kind of be stopped. Every form of life can get a virus. Believe it or not, bacteria are attacked by viruses. Viruses, very frequently, they will kill the cell that they live in, most often just by bursting it. They'll make so many copies of themselves until they just pop the cell. Some of them can live harmoniously for a little while, and then they'll kill. We'll talk about that in the appropriate place. Viroids. This is a single piece of RNA. There it is. Well, yeah, there it is. No, it doesn't even have the protein coat that a virus does. They're smaller, obviously, but these are basically plant diseases. So this is confusing, virus and viroids. So you need to keep those 2 terms separate in your head, okay? Last slide on this chapter, guys, prions. If you thought infectious nucleic acids was really mind-bending, how about this? This is infectious proteins. That's it. This is a protein. So I've got a protein. I'm just going to schematically draw this. This is not true to life, guys. There's the normal protein. Here comes this guy, and he's bent the wrong way. Now this is how they work. When he gets near this guy, he's going to cause this guy to bend the wrong way too. And now you've got 2 bent. That is the basis of mad cow disease, scrapie, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, Kuru. That's what it is. That's where it comes from, is these proteins causing the other proteins to bend in the wrong direction. What does that mean? It means it doesn't work. If I took your key and bent your key around and misshaped it, could you put it in your car and run it? Of course not. Well, guys, I'm sorry this is such a long video, but at least we got the first chapter knocked out. All right, guys, I'll be waiting for questions on this when you get a chance to take a look at it. I appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next chapter.